We've been told humanity's creation was an act of divine love, that we're made in the image of benevolent gods who cherished us as their greatest achievement. But ancient clay tablets buried beneath Mesopotamian sand for 4,000 years tell a very different story. New translations of Sumerian cuneiform reveal something unsettling. We weren't created to thrive. We were engineered. The Anunnaki designed humanity with a specific function in mind, and the texts describe that purpose with disturbing clarity. These aren't metaphors or poetic symbols. The language is transactional, mechanical. The tablets speak of labor, obedience, and a carefully calculated relationship between creators and their creation. What if everything we believe about human origins needs to be reconsidered? What if the oldest written records on Earth describe not our spiritual birth, but our employment contract? The Atrahasis epic dates to approximately 1800 BCE, though the events it describes claim to be far older. Discovered in the ruins of Ashurbanipal's library in Nineveh, these tablets preserve what the Sumerians considered their actual history, not mythology, but a record of how things began. The narrative opens not with humanity, but with the Anunnaki already present on Earth, organized into a strict hierarchy. At the top, Anu, the sky god. Below him, Enlil, commander of Earth operations. And below them, the Igigi, a class of lesser gods assigned to physical labor. For 40 years, the tablets are specific about this time span. The Igigi dug the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, excavated canals, and maintained the infrastructure of Anunnaki cities. Then, something extraordinary happened. The Igigi revolted. The tablets describe them burning their tools, surrounding Enlil's dwelling, and refusing to work. This wasn't a spiritual crisis, it was a labor dispute. The Anunnaki faced a practical problem. Their workforce had collapsed, and gods capable of rebellion made for unreliable servants. The solution they devised would alter the course of existence. In the assembly of the great Anunnaki, they debated creating a replacement workforce, something strong enough to perform the labor, but fundamentally incapable of organizing resistance like the Igigi had. The texts record Enki, the god of wisdom, proposing the creation of Lulu Amelu, primitive worker, not companion, not child. Worker. The Atrahasis tablet preserves the actual decision-making process. The Anunnaki didn't create humanity in a moment of inspiration or love. They created us to solve a labor shortage. We were the answer to a question about who would dig the canals now that the gods refused to. Enki didn't work alone. The tablets name Ninhursag, goddess of birth and biological crafting, as his collaborator in the creation process. What follows in the cuneiform is not a mystical act of divine breath, but something that reads disturbingly like laboratory notes. The texts describe mixing the essence of a slain god with the clay of the earth. Scholars have debated what these terms actually meant. Clay was the Sumerian metaphor for physical matter, for the biological substrate, but the essence of a god. The tablets use the word temtu, which some translate as blood, others as intelligence or genetic material, suggests something more specific was being combined. A divine component merged with earthly material to produce a hybrid creature. And it didn't work the first time. The tablets record failed attempts. Beings created without reproductive capacity. Creatures that couldn't speak or understand commands. Prototypes that had to be discarded. Ninhursag's process involved trial and error, adjustment, refinement. 14 birth goddesses were assembled to gestate the first batch of humans, 7 male, 7 female. The text describes them as molds, as production mechanisms. The successful model, Lulu Amelu, was designed with precise limitations, strong enough to dig and carry, intelligent enough to understand instructions and operate tools, but not intelligent enough to question purpose or organize resistance the way the Igigi had. The Sumerian word Lulu can mean primitive, but it also carries connotations of Hunhi, mixed, blended, hybrid. Not pure God, not pure earth creature. Something in between, calibrated for a function. The Atrahasis tablet states the objective plainly. Let him bear the yoke assigned by Enlil. Let man assume the drudgery of God. This wasn't poetry. It was a design specification. Humans were biological instruments, crafted to free the Anunnaki from physical toil while remaining manageable. Unable to mount the kind of coordinated rebellion that had brought the Igigi to Enlil's door. Enki's laboratory produced the solution to a problem. That solution was us. The Igigi rebellion wasn't a footnote in Sumerian cosmology, it was the catalyst for human existence. The tablets describe these lesser gods as the original labor force of the Anunnaki, assigned to what the texts call the heavy work of terraforming and construction. For 40 years, they dug the beds of the Tigris and Euphrates, hauled earth, and maintained the canal systems that would later sustain Mesopotamian civilization. The cuneiform describes their breaking point with specificity. They didn't quietly resign, they organized. The Igigi burned their tools, surrounded the house of Enlil during the night, and demanded an end to their servitude. The text preserves Enlil's response. Alarm, then fury, then a council. Jawand to address what had become an existential crisis for Anunnaki operations on Earth. The tablets record the debate that followed. Anu questioned whether the Igigi should be punished or destroyed, but Enki posed a different question. What would replace them? The work itself hadn't disappeared. The canals still needed maintenance. The city still required construction. The mines still demanded excavation. Destroying the Igigi solved nothing. It only eliminated the workforce without addressing the underlying need for labor. This is where the Atrahasis epic reveals its most uncomfortable detail. Humans weren't created because the Anunnaki wanted companions or worshippers, though later texts suggest we served both functions. We were created because the Igigi had successfully refused to work, and the Anunnaki needed a replacement labor force incapable of mounting the same resistance. The tablets describe the solution with transactional clarity. Create beings who possess physical strength and basic intelligence, but lack the divine status that had allowed the Igigi to organize and demand rights. The new workers wouldn't be gods. They would be something lesser, something manageable, something that could be directed without fear of coordinated rebellion. One passage states it explicitly, "Let the birth goddess create offspring, and let man bear the load of the gods." Not share in divine glory, not join the celestial family, bear the load. The Igigi had refused their yoke. Humanity was engineered to accept it. The Sumerian tablets don't hide their intentions behind allegory. The language describing humanity's purpose is administrative, almost bureaucratic. One passage from the Atrahasis epic states, "You have slaughtered a god together with his intelligence. I have removed your heavy work. I have imposed your toil on man." The word translated as toil is dulu, a term used in Sumerian economic texts to describe corvée labor, the forced work assignments given to subjects by their rulers. This wasn't spiritual service. It was taxation paid in physical labor. Other tablets from the same period describe humans being distributed among the Anunnaki like property. Specific gods received allotments of workers to maintain their estates, work their fields, and staff their temples. The texts use the same grammatical structures scribes used when recording this distribution of livestock or grain rations. Humans weren't adopted into divine families, we were assigned to them. One fragment records a complaint from an Anunnaki overseer. The humans work too slowly. They tire too easily. They require too much food for the output they provide. Another tablet describes a council debate about whether the human population should be culled when it grows too large and begins consuming resources needed by the gods. The solution proposed wasn't education or redistribution, it was plague, famine, and ultimately, flood. The Epic of Gilgamesh preserves a parallel account. Enlil, disturbed by the noise of human cities, decides to reduce the population through disease. When that fails to sufficiently decrease our numbers, he escalates. The tablets describe his reasoning not as moral judgment, but as resource management. Humanity had exceeded its optimal population density. Even the creation of human intelligence appears calculated. We were given enough cognitive capacity to understand complex commands, to learn skills, to pass knowledge to the next generation of workers. But the texts suggest careful limitations. One passage describes humans as needing constant oversight, unable to organize large-scale projects without divine supervision. We could follow instructions, but we weren't designed to write our own. The relationship the tablets describe isn't parent to child. It's owner to property, engineer to instrument. The Sumerian term for humanity, awilum, appears in legal documents describing servants and subordinates. When the texts say we were created to bear the yoke of the gods, they use the same phrasing applied to oxen bearing plows. This wasn't humanity's fall from grace. According to the oldest written records we possess, servitude wasn't a punishment for later sins. It was our original design specification. The Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis tablets both preserve an account of the flood, but their version has nothing to do with moral purification. The Sumerian texts describe a calculated extermination event triggered by a specific problem. Humanity had become too numerous, too loud, and too resource-intensive. The Atrahasis epic states that Enlil could not sleep because of the noise of human cities. Modern translations soften this to suggest metaphorical disturbance, but the Sumerian word rigmu means physical noise, clamor, commotion, the acoustic pollution of millions of voices and activities. Humanity hadn't sinned in a spiritual sense. We had simply multiplied beyond the tolerance threshold of our creators. Enlil's solution escalated in stages. First, he withheld rain, engineering a drought to reduce population through famine. When humans survived by fishing and foraging, he sent disease. When we adapted again, he imposed a total ecological collapse. The texts describe the earth becoming like an oven, vegetation dying, rivers drying. Each measure was designed to decrease human numbers back to manageable levels. But Enki kept intervening. The tablets record him teaching humans how to dig wells, how to survive on reduced rations, how to placate specific gods with targeted offerings. He undermined each of Enlil's population control measures, not out of pure compassion, but because, according to some interpretations, humans were his project, his creation, and their complete destruction represented a waste of his engineering effort. Finally, Enlil proposed total liquidation. The assembly of the Anunnaki agreed to send a flood that would erase humanity entirely. The tablets describe this decision in the language of livestock management. The experiment had failed. The herd had grown uncontrollable. The solution was culling, followed by restart. Enki's response violated the council's decree. He approached Atrahasis, the Sumerian equivalent of Noah, through a reed wall, technically keeping his oath not to warn humanity directly while still transmitting instructions to build a vessel. The specifications preserved in the tablets are precise. Dimensions, materials, waterproofing techniques. This wasn't mystical revelation, it was engineering data. The flood came. The tablets describe the Anunnaki retreating to their skyships while the earth was submerged, then returning after the waters receded to find Atrahasis' vessel intact. The passage that follows is remarkably telling. When Enlil discovered that humans had survived, his first reaction wasn't relief or joy, it was fury. He demanded to know who had undermined the extermination order. But then something shifted. The tablets record the Anunnaki realizing they had made an error. Without humans, who would maintain the canals? Who would provide food offerings? Who would perform the labor that the Igigi had refused, and the Anunnaki themselves would not resume? One passage describes the gods crowding like flies around Atrahasis' sacrifice after the flood. drawn by the smell of burning offerings, suggesting they had grown dependent on human service. The solution wasn't abandonment or liberation. The tablets describe new rules imposed on post-flood humanity: increased infant mortality, infertility for some classes of women, shorter lifespans. We were allowed to continue, but with built-in population controls to prevent another crisis of overgrowth. The flood wasn't divine judgment against wickedness. It was a reset button pressed when the product exceeded its design parameters. Atrahasis survived not because he was righteous in a moral sense, but because Enki needed to preserve the genetic line, the breeding stock of a useful species. The tablets describe him as exceptionally obedient, capable of following complex instructions, valuable enough to save. The flood narrative isn't about salvation. It's about quality control and the preservation of a functional prototype after a failed production run. These aren't fringe interpretations of obscure passages. The Atrahasis epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish. These are humanity's oldest written documents, composed by scribes who believed they were recording actual history. The Sumerians didn't present these accounts as metaphors or moral lessons. They catalogued them alongside king lists, tax records, and astronomical observations. Documents meant to preserve factual information for future generations. The tablets describe our creation with the same linguistic structures used for construction projects and resource allocation. They discuss our purpose using vocabulary drawn from labor contracts and property law. When they say humanity was made to bear the yoke of the gods, they employed terminology that appears elsewhere in Sumerian administrative texts describing the assignment of work obligations to subjects. Modern scholarship tends toward two interpretations. The first, these texts preserve distorted memories of actual events involving advanced beings, whether extraterrestrial, transdimensional, or representatives of a forgotten terrestrial civilization. The second, the Anunnaki, were powerful human rulers who established the first hierarchical states, and these myths encode the moment when free peoples were subjugated into the world's first permanent labor systems, with the gods being priest-kings who justified their authority through claims of divine status. Both interpretations arrive at the same uncomfortable conclusion. Whether literal or metaphorical, these texts describe the same thing: humanity beginning not in freedom, but in servitude. Our oldest stories aren't about a fall from paradise caused by our moral failure. They're about a design subordination built into our origin point. The question isn't whether you believe the Anunnaki were physical beings. The question is why the civilization that invented writing used that technology to preserve this particular account of human genesis. Why would the Sumerians, who built the first cities, developed mathematics, and established legal codes, record their own creation as a solution to a labor shortage? Perhaps because they were documenting what they understood to be true. The tablets suggest something that challenges both religious tradition and secular humanism: that humanity's baseline condition isn't freedom corrupted by later tyranny, but rather purpose-built subordination that we've spent millennia trying to overcome. Every workers' revolt, every slave rebellion, every revolution against monarchy, perhaps these aren't deviations from human nature, but expressions of our long resistance against the function we were originally designed to serve. The Agigi refused their yoke and won their freedom. We were created to be incapable of doing the same. Yet across every civilization and every century, humans have continuously organized, rebelled, and demanded autonomy, as if somewhere in our inherited memory, we retained an echo of what we were meant to be, prevented from doing. The tablets are clear about what we were made for, but 5,000 years of human history suggest we've been fighting that programming since the moment we gained enough consciousness to question it. Whether the Anunnaki were literal beings who engineered our genetics, or powerful rulers who engineered our social structures, the pattern remains. We were designed for control, and we have never stopped resisting it. Could it be that human history isn't the story of our fall, but the story of our refusal to accept the limitations built into our creation? The Sumerian tablets told us what we were made for. Everything that came after has been our answer.